Hey everybody, Michael the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. I am back this time to go ahead and give my reactions and reviews to all of the Disney Plus original shows and content that came out on Friday, the 27th of December. Um, a pretty quick turnaround from the last video, which got delayed because of Christmas. This one I'm trying to get out a little bit earlier this week because I'm headed to Walt Disney World this week to celebrate the tail end of the holiday season, and I will be gone when next week's stuff launches that Friday in the first week of January. So I'm trying to, keep my schedule pretty regular. Anyway, thanks as always for keeping up with these and being patient whenever scheduling stuff comes in the way. With all of that stuff, business out of the way, I'm going to jump straight into the stuff that happened this week. They released another episode of Pick of the Litter, the sort of nature documentary docu-series about guide dogs for the blind. This episode is called Off to Puppy College. If you'll recall from the last episode, it ended on a cliffhanger, unnecessarily dramatic beat in which one of the six dogs, Paco, relieves himself when he shouldn't during his evaluation, and it's up in the air as to whether or not he's going to make it. Well, they decide to pass him into the more intensive Guide Dogs for the Blind training, which is a 12-week intensive training. So all of the dogs pass through. The following day, the person who was raising the dog Raffi gets a call, and they decide to not include Raffi after all in this round of intensive training because he's still having issues with chewing on things and getting into the garbage. So they decide to actually pass him off to another dog raiser to see if they can help him get the basics down a little bit more before he can potentially get reevaluated for going into the intensive training. So there's a scene where, the trainer who's trained like 25 different dogs over her lifetime, she knows the drill. She has to pass off the dog to another person, and it's kind of emotional, I guess you could say, as they, get attached to the dogs that they're raising and everything like that. Another one of the dogs, Amara, the raisers of that dog get a call because the guide dogs for the blind people think Amara would be potentially a good candidate as a breeding dog to help sire other dogs that would have good genetic traits for being guide dogs. So when they bring her in for her evaluations with the rest of the dogs, they're going to consider Amara for potentially being a breeder dog. So basically, that's what happens in the rest of this episode. Is the five dogs, since Raffi got put to a different razor. The five dogs have to go through a medical evaluation. That's their first hurdle once they get accepted into the guide dogs training program. They have to go through a medical exam, and if they don't pass the medical exam, then they get a career change or whatever. They're not allowed to, if they have bad eyesight or whatever, they aren't allowed to continue with their training. So they all go in for their medical evaluation, and Amara is also getting another evaluation to see if she's a good candidate for being a breeder dog, which we don't really find out in this episode whether they decide on that or not, but all of the dogs pass their medical evaluations and get introduced into the 12-week program, basically. There's also another segment in this episode where they start showing the other sort of side of the guide dogs equation, which is there's this gal, Kendall, who lives with her twin sister, and they are both blind. And Kendall is applying for a guide dog, to have a guide dog. So they just show a little bit of her background and her situation, and I imagine that as the show goes on, we're going to track her her journey to getting her own guide dog with the journey of these potential dogs, and perhaps one of these five dogs may become Kendall's guide dog. I'm assuming that is what's going to happen by the end of this show. We'll see. The show is just like the first episode, and I'm imagining it's going to continue on this trend. It's a mixed bag for me. I think it's very interesting, the seeing what the dogs can do and seeing what they have to do in order to become guide dogs. And also, I did enjoy in this episode the seeing the aspect of Kendall applying for her guide dog and what it, what the hurdles are for people who are blind to get the guide dogs they need or desire or whatever. That's really interesting to me. I think that's the to me that's the real interest of this show, and that's the real like selling point of it. And so anytime where they try to like drum up unnecessary drama by like musical cues and stuff like that, when basically like dogs are being dogs, like, oh no, he chewed a slipper, and then they had like cue the violins, like that stuff drives me a little crazy, to be honest, because you don't really need to inject drama into this show. It could just be an interesting docu-series about guide dogs for the blind and following the journeys of these dogs without having to sort of ramp up the stakes, if you will. So I suspect I'm going to constantly have that issue with this show. As a result, it's not my favorite, nor will it ever be my favorite Disney original. But there is some worthwhile stuff here if you're just interested in the topic, or if you're a dog lover, or you're interested to see more in what it takes for these dogs to do their job, and what it also takes for blind people to be matched up with a guide animal. That stuff is very interesting and very valuable. So, take all that for what it is. Forky asked a question. Forky wants to know, what is a pet? And he's helped in answering this question by Officer Rib Tickles, voiced by Aloma Wright. And Rib Tickles is like a little tiny dog police officer that comes in like a pet patrol. It's almost like I'm dating myself here, but it's almost like a Polly Pocket or a whatever, those little miniature world clamshell things that they used to have when I was a kid. And it's like a dog in a police station and all that. So there's some really funny stuff about that, like police gags where this dog is setting up like a criminal lineup with a chalkboard and all that stuff. And then in answering Forky's question about what is a pet, Officer Rib Tickles tells a harrowing tale of being separated from her partner, police officer partner, and being eaten by a cat at the antique store from Toy Story 4, and detailing the process of being eaten by the cat and going into the stomach and going through the digestive system of the cat, coming out the other end and into the litter box and all that stuff. And there's a funny interaction as Rib Tickles tells that story. So, that's Forky asked a question. Really funny. Tony Hale just cracks me up every time. So, awesome. Marvel Hero Project this week follows a kid named Braden in his comic book is eventually called Battling Braden. And Braden is hearing impaired. He has had to, he was born with 75% hearing loss and has had to wear hearing aids for most of his life. And he comes from a family where he's fortunate that even though insurance doesn't cover hearing aids for a lot of people, for most people in the world, his family is able to afford hearing aids. Even like they tell the story of like he left his hearing aids out on the floor one day when he wasn't feeling well, and his dog chewed them up, and they're like $3,000 a pop, like per hearing aid. And of course his mom was upset and angry that his hearing aid got chewed up and that he was being irresponsible with it. And they sat down and had a discussion about how they're fortunate that they can afford to get replacements and stuff like that, but there are a lot of hearing impaired people in the world, and children and everybody, that they don't have that luxury. They can't even afford a pair, let alone a replacement pair. And that got Braden's wheels turning about how he wanted to help people around the world who are less fortunate to have access to hearing aids. That it struck him as a solvable problem, and He's 100% right. It is a solvable problem. So he set to work using the internet and social media to start raising a bunch of money to help people get hearing aids. And within like a very short amount of time, like a month or two, he raised like $15,000 just on his own word of mouth and gave it to a hearing aid or hearing foundation. And then after he was able to do that, that increased his philanthropy profile. He was noticed by Ellen, and the Ellen Show gave him like $20,000. And then eventually, through all those, over the course of a couple of years, he raised like more than $100,000. And within a year of setting his, he just set a goal when he made a video and put it online. I want to go around the world and give people access to hearing aids that need them, people that can't get them. And within a year, less than a year of setting that goal for himself, he was in Guatemala with money he had raised, giving people in Guatemala hearing aids. So he's just a really, really impressive person, very driven. And really doing something important. And it's really nice to see somebody who recognizes what they can do and puts their talents and money and time to good use, and gives, as always, gives hope for the future generations. So that's Marvel Hero Project this week. Disney Family Sundays was kind of cool. They built a Sugar Rush Racer. That was the craft of the week. It's a pretty involved craft. It's not one I would do because it's kind of more kid oriented. Even though I love Wreck-It Ralph and I love Vanellope von Schweetz, and all the Sugar Rush gang is like one of my favorite aspects of that movie. So that's really appealing to me. But this is like for making a kid's. Like decorating a kid's wagon to mimic a Sugar Rush racer. So there's a lot that's kind of involved in this one. You would need a wagon, or to procure a wagon, or something you could put the Sugar Rush racer form on top of. But and there are a lot of crafting supplies in this because you're decorating it a lot to make it look like candy and all the stuff just like from the movie. So it is really cool. It sort of would be sort of a bigger family project if that is appealing to you. Or if, you could downsize this, you could scale it, you could make your own, like, I could take this little car that I have sitting on my desk, for example, and put like a downscaled version of their craft on it. That could be kind of a cool thing. There's a bunch of different ways you could do it, but if the Sugar Rush thing appeals to you, this is cool. They tell you everything you need to do it, as always, and we watch a family build their own racer and put it on like a radio flyer wagon. So that's pretty cool. High School Musical, the series this week was an episode called The Tech Rehearsal. And in the fallout of the Thanksgiving episode, we saw that the robotics lab like sparked out and started a fire in the school. And so yeah, like the theater gets all burned up, and like a lot of their costumes and props and everything for the musical get burned up in the fire. The school doesn't burn down because the sprinklers rescue everything, but like their props and the whole theater area is like totally damaged. So they have to find a new theater to rehearse in, and that's kind of the meat and potatoes of this episode. They find this place called the El Rey because Carlos, the choreographer, his uncle is like a real estate guy who has connections to this theater that hasn't been used in years. And then we find out like Miss Jen has a weird reaction to going to that particular theater, and we find out that's where she was supposed to be watching, or where she was watching the premiere of High School Musical, the movie, which she was in or thought she was going to be, but her scene was cut from the movie, and we find that out in this episode that like she was going to have a bit part with a line and everything like that, and her scene got cut from the movie, which does happen to people in the film industry all the time. But she was young, and she was very devastated by that, and this was a very traumatic place for her to go to. And then later on in the episode, she actually gets a singing number when she gets like kind of passes out in there when gets super overstressed about helping with the musical and being in this building and all of that. And she has like a dream sequence, sort of epiphany where she's visited by Lucas Grabeel, who played Ryan, Sharpay's brother in the original High School Musical. And he does a number with her. He does a cameo and visits her in this like sort of dream sequence, and they have a song and dance together, and that puts it in her head to inspire about her re-inspire her confidence about who she is and what she's trying to accomplish and all that stuff. So she's her mission is kind of renewed, and she's decided, I guess, that they're going to go back to the school, even though the theater's burned up, to help figure out how to keep doing their production. And I guess we'll find out in the next episode what she has in mind, how they're going to be able to pull that off with a burned up area and props and all that. I don't know what they're going to do with that. Also, Gina's not in this episode at all. It appears that she's just straight up taken off with her mom for the FEMA thing, and she is kind of MIA in this whole episode. Ashlyn has another great moment with Big Red. They're flirting with each other throughout this one, and that's kind of cute. And Red's trying to figure out all the stagecraft in this weird, dodgy theater. Courtney has a song as she's testing out the mic equipment on stage, and a bunch of the people find out that she's a good singer, which is kind of a weird scene to me, because I think a lot of the people, like, everybody's really surprised and awed when she sings this little like testing song, but most of the people there, I think, already knew that she was a good singer, so I don't know why they're so shocked. But some of the people are shocked because she's so talented at making costumes and props and stuff, that they were surprised that she was also a very good singer as well. And there's some tension between her and Nini, because Nini reveals to her that in the last episode, when she was struggling with her identity and trying to not be defined by the boys that she dates and all that kind of stuff, she decided to do something for herself and try to apply to a performing arts program in Denver. And she confesses that to Courtney, and then Courtney's kind of upset, like, you're going to leave me, or we're not going to go to college together, or we're not going to figure out what's going on after school together, or whatever. That's a thing. And then she's having some backstage tension with Ricky, because they're still icy towards each other, but they start to soften and almost have a moment where they're about to kiss each other, so they're warming back up on each other as well. So that's going on, and then the episode kind of ends with Courtney. I think it appears as if she's figured out that she was kind of mean to Nini about the Denver performing school thingy, and so I think she's calling them up on Nini's behalf, or maybe on both of their behalf, to try to enter together or something. I don't know what she's doing there, but she calls up that like youth performing arts program at the end of this episode. So that's kind of what goes on in this. They're all in this weird, dilapidated theater trying to figure out what's going to go on with their show. EJ also has some moments in this, too. I forgot to mention him in the last episode as well. For some reason, his kind of B story has been slipping my mind. In the Thanksgiving episode, he started to get addicted to confessing the truth about stuffs, because he came clean to Nini about having stolen her phone and all the stuff that he did wrong, and even though that didn't patch up their relationship, he felt really good about telling the truth. So then he went on his Instagram account and just started getting addicted to telling the truth about everything he ever did wrong in his life, like when he cheated at water polo and all, like any small minor infraction. That was kind of a funny thing. In this episode, he finds Miss Jen's like cast file box that shows all of her notes on the different actors, and he looks at his file and finds that she wrote down that he doesn't have an emotional resonance with the material, and so he sees that, and then when he's doing like a rehearsal thing, he's like emotionally overacting and stuff, and everybody's like, what are you doing? This is weird. And Carlos confronts him later in the episode because he finds out, or he realizes, oh, you looked in the file, and that's like messing with you. And then that's kind of the end of EJ's arc for this episode. So that's kind of where he's at. He's trying to figure out where he fits in this, and what are his talents as an actor and all that stuff. And it was sort of a good episode, connecting episode to get us to the next place. And there were some great character developments. I like whenever you have scenes with Ashlyn and Big Red. That's very cute. And it's nice to see Ricky and Nini softening to each other again. And they give you a lot of cute details about their background. So, High School Musical, it's still going. um, in Encore this time, they talk about a group that did a production of Fiddler on the Roof back in 2001 in Anaheim, California at Catella High School. And it's kind of an interesting episode because this is a really fun group of people. They're pretty tight knit and they have like really fun personalities. Which Fiddler is a really good show for a close knit group, and they're just really fun, outgoing, and funny people that are doing this together and reuniting about that. They don't have a lot of personal issues with each other or weird, quirky personality things. There is kind of a quirky guy who went on to have some renown in a rock band for a while. He was nationally touring for a while in a rock and roll band, but then the band broke up and stuff, and he's kind of been trying to figure out where he belongs since then. That's kind of an angle of this. There's also a guy who hasn't changed very much since high school because his mother unexpectedly died when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and that kind of sent him into a depression, and he's been trying to figure out his identity since then, and that's a part of this as well. So there are some interesting, individual people pieces in this, and they do put on a great show. Fiddler's really fun, and they're really into it. The only thing that was a little disappointing to me about... Oh, and I should mention, Kristen Bell is pretty heavily involved. She visits the cast, I suspect, because this one was in California, and it was probably easier for her schedule to be able to make an appearance. But she does show up in this one and, comes during one of the rehearsals to give a bunch of the different actors, personal notes on what they're doing and, acting tips and stuff, and that's pretty cool. A pretty cool scene to see her involved, and... you get a more of an impression of Kristen Bell's process and why she's a good actor and stuff like that. So that's cool. What I was going to say is one of the things that is kind of disappointing to me about this episode is there's really no involvement in this at all from Catella High School. They don't show the school at all. All of the rehearsals and the eventual performance are all in Pasadena. They show the rehearsals at the Scottish Temple of Pasadena, and then they do a thing at one of the theaters in Pasadena, even though the school's in Anaheim. So I was a little disappointed by that on a personal level because my mother-in-law actually went to Catella High School in Anaheim, and it would have been kind of cool to see the school and some of the area and stuff like that. And if there's any educators that are there and stuff like that, but they didn't show any the old theater director is usually involved in these casts. They didn't show that in this episode. There was no former theater director from Catella or anything like that. They didn't really show the school at all, so that was a little disappointing. But otherwise, the cast did a great job, and the people in this were really fun and interesting to watch. And Fiddler's a really fun show. So Encore this week was pretty cool. The World According to Jeff Goldblum. He investigates the world of RVs, which is kind of interesting in this one because in a lot of the other episodes, Jeff Goldblum is investigating something he has absolutely no experience with at all. And in this one, he does have experience with being in RVs only because, he's always got a trailer on movies that he's working on and stuff. So he's spent a considerable amount of his life inside of an RV. But he's never driven them or used them for camping or recreational purposes. He confesses in this episode that he's never been camping at all in his life. So that's kind of interesting. He investigates people who live in RV parks or people who have taken their family just on the road for a year or two at a time while their kids are young to, educate them and homeschool them for a couple of years and stuff like that. He goes to the RV Hall of Fame, which I think is in Indiana, to see their displays of old historical RVs. He goes to a place, I don't exactly remember where it is. I think it's on the East Coast somewhere, or in the Midwest somewhere, where there are Amish people that build RVs at this factory, and that's a really interesting segment because Jeff Goldblum is being in peak Goldblum form, and I don't think some of these Amish guys really know what to make of him or what to do with him, and their interactions are really funny because Jeff Goldblum in that segment is not only learning about RVs, but he's learning about the Amish as well, and how, you probably have similar questions that he did, well, if you're Amish and you don't use electricity or technology, how are you working in this advanced RV plant with, mechanical tools and stuff like that? And they explain all that. They explain how they're able to do that and still adhere to their belief system and all that kind of stuff. So that's an interesting aspect. And then finally, in the end, he goes to a demolition derby that's like RVs that are all old, beat up RVs. And there's like a great segment where you get to watch these RVs just wrecking each other. So that's pretty cool. And Jeff Goldblum is like really, really Jeff Goldblum in this episode. So if that's a part of your appeal of this series, I think you're really going to enjoy this one because there's a lot of great little fun ticks and Goldblumisms and stuff that happen in this episode. So this is a really fun one. I was into it. And then finally, the One Day at Disney short this week is following a person called Katie Wetzel, who stars as Dory in Finding Nemo, the stage musical. She's like a puppeteer for Dory, and she does the voice and the songs and everything. And it's really cool. This segment was featured, if you happened to see or watch the Walt Disney World Christmas Parade or Holiday Special that aired on ABC on Christmas Day, that was showing the parade live from Disney World. This segment was aired during that they featured her during that show. So if you already saw that, this is the exact same thing. There's maybe the slightest, tiniest bit extended on the Disney Plus segment, the One Day at Disney segment, but it otherwise is the exact same segment. But it is very interesting and very cool. She has a sweet anecdote about how when she was like 14, she visited Disney World with her mom, who was sick with cancer, but it made a big difference in her mom's life that they were there and they had a really good Disney experience, and that caused her to want to work at Disney to help bring the same good vibes and happiness to people throughout her career, and eventually ended up in this stage production controlling Dory in the Finding Nemo musical. And they also go a little bit into the stagecraft that's involved in that, because they have to be on wire harnesses and control these big fish puppets and stuff. And so it actually is really interesting if you want to see just a little tiny glimpse of what goes into that. The interesting thing with these One Day at Disney segments is, I mean, you could make a whole documentary just about these each individual person, but even as a 5-minute short little piece, it's just really cool to put them all together, you know, and like, or watch a bunch of them in a row and be like, wow, this is what a bunch of different people do for Disney. And that's like a really cool, that's kind of the point of it, and that's like a really cool thing. So this was a cool little episode of seeing the woman who plays Dory in one of the Finding Nemo stage musicals. So that's pretty much all for the Disney Plus originals for this week. I think I pretty much got them all. I have finally watched the film Togo, that was also released last week, starring Willem Dafoe, and I will be posting a separate video about that probably today as well, whenever this video drops. So if you're interested in my reactions to that particular film, stay tuned. That will get its own individual video, as well as the season finale of the first season of The Mandalorian. I watched that as well, and I will be giving that its own little video with my impressions of that. So if you're interested in those, stay tuned to this space. They will be forthcoming as quickly as I can get them out, probably today if I can meet my video making goals. So thanks as always for watching these. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. As always, let me know if you have any thoughts about these, any of these shows or episodes if you've seen them, or if any of this stuff sounds interesting to you and there are things you want to see. Anyway, let me know. I hope you continue to have a great holiday season, and an excellent week, a magical week, and best wishes when we turn the calendar to the new year. I hope you all have a magical new year. Thanks very much for watching these, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.